How to play Del Mar by Sad Fantasy. This tune is fairly easy to play, so this is an absolute beginner's lesson. Saying that, there's some basic techniques we'll cover in this lesson that you might not have come across before. And whilst we're not looking at the techniques in detail, the amount of detail we will cover will give you just enough to play the tune, but also it will act as a good foundation for later when we go into far more detail on each technique. To remember what you've learned today, you'll obviously need the tab and the notes, and you can get this completely free at www.ebooks4guitar.com, and it's in the same download section as the free PDF ebooks on fingerstyle guitar. So if you've already downloaded those, you might want to go back and download the First Steps guitar course as well. Or you might need to re-download the First Steps guitar course, as I've made a lot of changes to the ebook recently. Once you've learned how to play this tune, it's great fun to play with the backing track. So I'll put the backing track at the end of this video, but I'll also put it in its own video, so it's easier for you to access and then you can practice more easily. This tune wasn't specifically written for the GCH Guitar Academy guitar course. However, there isn't a commercial license on it at the moment, so the only places you'll hear the tune is either here or on a Sad Fantasy channel. So let's hear the tune first. Del Mar by Sad Fantasy. Hopefully you'll have noticed that the guitar doesn't start straight away. Firstly, there's some foley sound, which is the nighttime noises and the waves. Then there's 16 bars with just the drums and the bass, so there's no guitar playing. To make it easier to practice this tune, I'll put the backing track at the end of this video, but I'll also put a shortened backing track where I remove the intro and the foley sound, and there'll be just 2 bars intro before you can play along with the backing. However, it's still useful to learn how to count the 16 bars because there's a break in the middle of the tune with 16 bars rest, and you'll come across numerous tunes in the future that have got multiple bars rest in them. Here's how to count those 16 bars. Firstly, you need to know that the tune is in 4/4 time, and this means that there's 4 crotchet beats per bar. So to count the bars, we'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. But where you have to count multiple bars, if you count like this, you can easily lose your place. So to prevent this, we replace the number 1 in each bar with the number of the bar. So it would sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, etc. If you get into the habit of counting bars like this, you'll find it far easier to keep your place in any piece of music. However, eventually, after you've practiced any one tune, you'll get used to hearing the cues within the music, so then you won't have to count the bars at all. So you can hear a practical application of this. Here's me counting along with the first 16 bars of that tune up until the guitar comes in. One, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4, 9, 2, 3, 4, 10, 2, 3, 4, 11, 2, 3, 4, 12, 2, 3, 4, 13, 2, 3, 4, 14, 2, 3, 4, 15, 2, 3, 4, 16, 2, 3, 4. As I mentioned earlier, there are cues in the music. So for example, in this tune, the first 8 bars is just drum beats. Then the second 8 bars is drums and bass. And from the 16th bar onwards, when the guitar starts to play, a synthesizer pad plays at the same time. So if you're hearing the synthesizer and you're not playing, you've missed the cue. But let's not worry about this too much for now. We need to learn the tune first before we try to put it together with the backing track. Let's start then by learning the scale that the first part of the tune is based round. Because once you've got this scale, you'll find it far easier to get the fingering correct. And the scale is the B Aeolian scale or the B natural minor scale. Both names refer to the same scale. If you've got your guitar with you, now's the time to pick it up so you can play along with me. To play this scale, firstly place the first finger on the 2nd fret of the A string and play that. Now press the 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the A string and play that. Place the 4th finger on the 5th fret of the A string and play that. Now press the 1st finger on the 2nd fret of the D string and play that. Now press the 3rd finger on the 4th fret of the D string and play that. Now press the 4th finger on the 5th fret of the D string and play that. Now press the first finger on the second fret of the G string and play that. And finally press the third finger on the fourth fret of the G string and play that. Here that is again, only a little bit faster. Place the first finger on the second fret of the A string. Place the third finger on the fourth fret of the A string. Place the fourth finger on the fifth fret of the A string. Place the first finger on the second fret of the D string. Place the third finger on the fourth fret of the D string. Place the fourth finger on the fifth fret of the D string. Place the first finger on the second fret of the G string, and now press the third finger on the fourth fret of the G string. And here's how you want to eventually make this sound. And once you're happy you've got the fingering hand, you want to try using alternating plectrum strokes, i.e. down, up, etc. It's a good idea to start playing down, up, down strokes early in your guitar playing, because then it'll become a good habit that you stick to. Right, once we've got this scale, we can move on to the first theme of the tune. And the first theme of the tune is actually most of the tune. And the first theme could actually be broken down into the first two lines, being repeated with slight differences. So you can see that because so many of the notes are repeated throughout the tune, that there's not a great deal to learn, making it an easy tune to learn. To start with then, I'll play through the first two lines of the tune with a metronome at a steady 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Just listen to and watch how it's being played at the moment, paying particular attention to the fingering hand and noticing how I'm using the same fingering to play the tune as I used to play the scale. Hopefully you can recognise from that demonstration that if you learn the scale properly, you can easily play the tune. Right, let's take a look at the first 3 bars, in particular the third bar, because bar 1 and 2 are very straightforward. However, in the third bar, you'll notice this part here, where you're playing a 4, hammering onto the 5th fret, then pulling off back to the 4th fret. And this is what that sounds like. A hammer-on is where you literally hammer the fingering hand into place. So you don't need to pick the string because you've hammered the fingering hand so hard. So to do one of these, you'd play the first note and then hammer the second note using the fingering hand. And with a pull-off, you drag the finger off the string as you're removing it from the guitar. So with the fingering hand, you're plucking the string as you pull it off the guitar. I've done entire videos on how to play hammer-ons and pull-offs with exercises, so you can build your strength up and learn how to play them correctly. I'll put the links to those down below in the description. But as I said at the beginning of this lesson, I'm only touching on the techniques in this video to introduce them to people who have never come across them before. If this is the first time you've played a hammer-on or pull-off, the example in this tune probably isn't the best example to start with, because it's far more difficult with the fourth finger, because it tends to be the weakest finger. But it's well worth practicing those three notes over and over again for a while. And if you do, you'll probably find your hand gets sore. But don't worry if it does. Just take a rest for a while. And if you find the hammer-on and pull-off is too hard for you or too advanced at the stage you're at, don't worry, just play it normally using your pick, but try to play it as smoothly as you can. Right, let's just start with the first two bars, which are fairly easy, and you just have to start with the third finger in the 4th fret. Here's the first two bars being played with a 2-bar introduction. Here that is again at a nice steady 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Try to play along if you think you're ready. And here that is again one more time for anyone who's playing along. Right, let's take another look at that third bar, but this time the complete bar. So here's bar 3 being played with a 2-bar introduction. Don't worry or be disheartened if you have to go away and practice this bar. At this stage it's quite difficult, so it might take a little bit of practice before you get it right. Or if you prefer, you could continue on through the tune and then return back to that bar at the end. Here it is anyway with a 2-bar introduction for anyone who wants to try and play along. And here that is again one last time with a 2-bar introduction. Right, let's try and bring the first 3 bars together. So here they are being played with a 2-bar introduction at a nice slow 100 beats per minute. Here that is again at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along with it. And here that is again one last time. Right, let's move on to the 4th and 5th bar, which are really easy because you've already learnt to play them. all you have to do to play this bar is play 3/4 of the scale you've learnt previously, the B Aeolian scale. The only slight complication is that it doesn't start on the first beat of the bar. So with the 2 bars introduction, you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, start. Here's what that sounds like being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, so you can try and play along with it. And here that is again, one last time, just in case you're having trouble with the counting. Right, we've just got to do the last 3 bars of line 2, and then you'll know the whole of theme 1. These 3 bars are easy enough because they only contain one phrase. However, again, it starts on the second beat of the bar, just making it a little awkward. Here that is being played with a 2-bar introduction. Most of the tune is off the first beat of the bar, so when you start playing the whole tune, this becomes very straightforward. I think it's actually harder playing it in pieces, but it's easier for you to learn the tune in pieces. Here's the last 3 bars of line 2 again, with a 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along. Right, let's bring the first 2 lines together and try to play them. So here they are being played with a 2-bar introduction at a steady 100 beats per minute. Here that is again, so you can try and play along if you think you're ready. And here that is one last time. Once you can play the first 2 lines, you can basically play the whole tune, because in a lot of places you're just repeating those first 2 lines with very slight changes. But if you look through the score to the beginning of the 3rd line, we've got this. And this is where we play the 2nd fret and slide up to the 4th fret without re-picking it. So it sounds like this. Now, the trick to playing this technique is to put just the right amount of pressure onto your finger. If you press too hard, you won't be able to slide fluently. And if you don't put enough pressure on, you won't be able to hear the 4. Here's what that should sound like a couple of times. You'll notice I'm playing the slide with the 3rd finger on the fingering hand, and this is so when I finish the slide, I'm on the correct finger and in the correct position to continue playing the tune through. Now, before we move on, if we take a look at those first 4 lines, you'll notice that the first 2 lines are more or less identical to the second 2 lines. Apart from the slide, the only difference is the 3rd bar of each set of 2 lines. And those bars sound quite similar. So you can hear how similar those bars are. Here's bar 4 and 5 being played, and then bars 12 and 13 being played straight after, so you can hear the difference. Because you've already learnt how to play bars 5 and 6, here's bars 12 and 13 being played on their own with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along if you think you can. And here that is again for anyone who's playing along. You may remember I said that the first theme repeats 3 times throughout the tune. And the only slight difference between these repeats is that 1 bar. And there's only 3 variations of that 1 bar. So basically, you can already play 3/4 of this tune. Here's what those first 4 lines sound like being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along. And here that is again, one last time for anyone who's playing along. Right, let's take a look at the next 4 lines, which is the second theme. And firstly, we'll do a quick overview. Looking at these next 4 lines, you'll notice we're using some of the techniques we've had to use in the first 4 lines, like the hammer on and pull off. However, this time it's in different frets with different fingers. So if anything, it's easier. And we've got to slide down just across 1 fret. Again, this is easier. However, we do introduce one new technique here, which is where you see the dot over the note. This is a staccato. And what that means is we cut the note short, so it sounds like this. Now, it's important for me to point out that you only play the notes with dots over them as staccato. If there's no dot, don't play it as staccato. So, for example, looking at line 1, you'll see the first 3 notes are staccato. Then we got a hammer and pull, which aren't staccato. Then we got 4 more notes that are staccato. And then the final 2 notes with the slide aren't staccato. So this is what that first line sounds like. Right, before we learn how to play this next section, let's just take a look at the scale this next section is based on, because once you've learnt that, it becomes easy to play. And like the first section, this is based on a B Aeolian or B natural minor scale. However, it's up at the 6th and 7th fret. There's one awkward thing about this scale, in that it changes position from the 6th fret position to the 7th fret position. And what we mean by that is when it's being played in the 6th fret position, that's where the first finger will live. So we're playing first finger for the 6th fret, second finger for the 7th fret, third finger for the 8th fret, and fourth finger for the 9th fret. However, halfway through this scale, we go from the 6th fret position to the 7th fret position, where the first finger lives on the 7th fret. So, before we learn how to do that, here's what it looks like. Here's how to play the B Aeolian scale slowly. Firstly, we place the 4th finger on the 9th fret of the D string and play that. Then we place the first finger on the 6th fret of the G string and play that. Place the second finger on the 7th fret of the G string and play that. Now place the 4th finger on the 9th fret of the G string and play that. Now we have to move up a position, so you place the first finger on the 7th fret of the B string and play that. Place the second finger next to it on the 8th fret of the B string and play that. Now place the 4th finger on the 10th fret of the B string and play that. And finally, place your first finger on the 7th fret of the top E string and play that. Right, let's go through that a little bit more quickly. Firstly, play the 9th fret of the D string with the 4th finger. Now play the 6th fret of the G string with the first finger. Play the 7th fret of the G string with the second finger. Play the 9th fret of the G string with the 4th finger. Move up a position, so you play the 7th fret of the B string with the first finger. Now play the 8th fret of the B string with the second finger. Play the 10th fret of the B string with the 4th finger. And finally play the 7th fret of the top E string with the first finger. Here's how that scale should sound, being played slowly. Here's that scale again, being played up and back down again at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. If you want to try and play along, you can. And here that is again, if you want to try playing along with it. Right, let's get back to the tune and carry on with learning these 4 lines. But if you need more time with the scale, you could pause the video here to practice, or you could come back another day once you're more familiar with it. Right, let's start by looking at line 1 and firstly bar 1, which has 3 notes which are all staccato. And to play the staccato, we simply play the note, but then lift the finger shortly after. Now, there are other ways of playing staccato, for example, retouching the string with your finger or with the pick, or muting it with the palm of the hand. However, by far the easiest way for standard staccato is to just lift the fingering finger very slightly, so it stops the string from vibrating. Here's what the first bar sounds like with just a 1 bar introduction. And here that is again, in case you want to try and play along. This first 3 bars are based on the 7th fret position until we get to the last 2 notes where we slide down to the 6th fret. However, we'll look at that when we get to it. Firstly though, let's take a look at the hammer on and pull off. And this hammer on and pull off is far easier than the first hammer on and pull off we did, because this time you're doing it with the 1st and 2nd finger. So, if you skipped the last hammer on and pull off, don't skip this one. Use this as an excuse to practice it. To play this hammer on and pull off, firstly, you place the 1st finger on the 7th fret of the B string. Play that, and then hammer on the 2nd finger next to it in the 8th fret, and then pull it back off again. So you only pick the string once at the beginning. Here that is being done a couple of times so you can see and hear it. Once you've played the hammer on and pull off, there's 2 more staccato notes. So the first 2 bars should sound like this. Here that is again, in case you want to try and play along. And here that is again, one last time. To play the 3rd bar of this line, we've simply got 2 more staccato notes based on the same position in the same scale, and then we've got a 7 slide to the 6th. So to play this slide, we simply play the 7th fret of the G string with the 1st finger, and then slide it down to the 6th fret without re-picking the string. So it sounds like this. Bringing that whole line together then, this is how it sounds with a 2 bar introduction. Here that is again for anyone who wants to play along. And here that is again one last time. Moving on to the second line, you'll notice that there's no staccato played in this line whatsoever, so you play all the notes normally. But you will also notice that this line is based in the 6th fret position. But if you play normally from the first line to the second line, you'll be based in exactly the right position, because you finish the first line on the 6th fret of the G string, and you start the second line on the 6th fret of the G string. So if you leave your first finger in place on the 6th fret, it'll make life a lot easier. To play the first bar of this line, you simply pick the 6th fret on the G string and hammer on to the 7th fret with the second finger and then pull off again. Finally playing the 9th fret on the D string with the 4th finger. So it sounds like this. The next two bars are more or less a straight scale run using the scale you've just learnt. So here's the whole of the second line with a 2-bar introduction. You might have to pause here and practice that for a bit before you try it. But if you're ready, here it is again being played with a 2-bar introduction. Right, let's bring that line together with the previous line. So we're playing the first two lines. Here they are being played with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, in case you're trying to play along. We've just got the last two lines of theme 2 to go through, and then you'll know everything you need to know to play the entire tune. And these two lines are fairly straightforward. The first few notes are identical to the first few notes of the first two lines. However, then it goes off on a bit of a tangent. However, it stays within the scale and it doesn't introduce any new techniques, so it's quite straightforward to play. I'll break these last two lines down into 3 parts, the first part being the first 3 bars. And the only part of those 3 bars that needs any explanation is the first 3 notes of the 3rd bar. To play these 3 notes, you play the 9 and then play the 7 whilst keeping the 9 in place, and then you play the 9 again. So the 9 rings throughout. Here's what that sounds like a couple of times. And you can see that's not difficult, it just needed explaining. Here's the first 3 bars of the last 2 lines of theme 2 being played, with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, with the 2-bar introduction, in case you want to try and play along. However, I think most people will need to pause the video here and practice that for a bit. And here's those 3 bars again, one last time. Right, let's take a look at the next 2 bars, where we play the 6 hammering to the 7 and pulled back off to the 6, just like we did in the previous 2 lines. But this time we go to the 7th fret and then the 9th fret. Here's what those 2 bars sound like with a 2-bar introduction. There's nothing in these 2 bars that's going to take any extra explanation, because we've already done very similar things throughout the tune. So we'll try and play it straight away. Here it is being played with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along if you think you're ready. And here that is again, one last time. Again, the last 3 bars don't introduce any new techniques, so you just need to know how they should sound. Here's the last 3 bars being played with a 2-bar introduction. And here's the last 3 bars once more. Bringing together the last 2 lines, this is what they should sound like. And here's those last 2 lines one more time. Here's those last 4 lines, or the whole of theme 2 being played through with a 2-bar introduction. If you think you're ready to play along with it, have a try. Otherwise, don't worry about it. You can come back later. And here that is again, one last time. Here's the whole of theme 1 and theme 2, or in other words, the whole of the first page being played with a 2-bar introduction at 100 beats per minute. Once you can play this, you can play the whole tune. And here that is again, one last time. At the end of this video are 3 versions of the backing track. One with the guitar and a 2-bar introduction. The second one without the guitar and a 2-bar introduction. And the third one is the complete backing track, complete with the intro. That's it for today's lesson, and it's been a long one. So if you've managed to stick to this point, 1, thank you very much, but 2, well done. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, and if you'd like to see more guitar lessons, guitar reviews, and various other guitar content, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload new videos. And don't worry, you won't be spammed, because I only upload a video every 1 or 2 weeks. For example, this video took me at least 2 weeks to make. If you haven't already got the tablature for this lesson, you can get it completely free at www.ebooksforguitar.com, and it's in the free ebooks download section, and it's in the First Steps Guitar course. Before I sign out, I have to give a really special thank you to my channel members, because without them I wouldn't be able to give away the PDFs for free or make these guitar lessons. And if you can afford it, and if you'd like to, please consider becoming a channel member, because then you'll be helping to support the making of new lessons in the future. Bye for now, until the next time.